Good evening and welcome. Tonight's debate is co-sponsored by the city's Campaign Finance Board. The board is a nonpartisan, independent city agency that administers the city's voluntary campaign finance program, which multiplies the impact of New Yorkers' small contributions by matching them with public funds. The board also oversees debates which are sponsored by media organizations selected by the board. The debates are mandatory for candidates who join the program. Candidates who do not join may be invited by the sponsors to appear. Tonight's debate is being sponsored by New York One, New York One Noticias, WNYC Radio, the New York Daily News, and Citizens Union. Our panelists tonight who will join me in the questioning are Brian Lair of WNYC Radio, Adam Lisberg of the Daily News, Juan Manuel Benitez of New York One Noticias, and Michael Scotto, also of New York One. Now, let's introduce the two candidates. The order in which they are standing and speaking was determined earlier today by a coin toss. We welcome the City Controller of New York, William Thompson. And we also welcome now the Mayor of the City of New York, Michael Bloomberg. We begin now with 1-minute opening statements, and we start with you, Mayor Bloomberg.
Well, first let me start by thanking our hosts for sponsoring this debate. And then also...
Okay. Hold on 1 second, please, Mr. Mayor. While that situation, just please hold on 1 second, candidates. While that situation is dealt with, we'll get to it in just 1 second. Just please, if I could ask the audience, the mayor has agreed to appear here tonight, so has Mr. Thompson, and I really believe that we should all be respectful of the mayor and Mr. Thompson in this debate. And so, Mr. Mayor, I apologize for that. Please start your opening
Not
statement.
a problem. It is New York. Let me first thank our hosts and sponsors, particularly El Museo del Barrio, por su hospitalidad. We all know we are going through some tough times here. In the morning, when I take the subway, I hear it in the diners, on the streets. People are worried. People are worried about how they're going to pay the rent, how they're going to pay their mortgage, whether they're going to keep their jobs, whether their kids are going to get jobs. Now, we came out of a situation similar to this back in 2001 after the terrible tragedy of 9/11, and I know we can do it again. We did it then by coming together. We did it then by focusing on what's right and not looking at special interest needs. And if we pull ourselves together, we can do it another time. Today, the key is to focus on what will make this city better. Today, the key is to pull together. Today, the key is to improve education and build affordable housing. We've come too far. We've brought crime down to record lows. Now is not the time to stop. And I think if we don't bow to partisan politics and to special interests, the best days for New York are ahead. And I'd appreciate everybody's consideration, November 3rd, at the voting booth.
Thank you, Mr. Bloomberg. And now we turn to you, City Controller Bill Thompson.
Buenas noches a todos. Good evening, Dominic, to you, to the panel, to New York One, and to the Campaign Finance Board, and for the opportunity to have this debate tonight. I'm excited by the prospect of debating my Republican opponent face to face the way that it should be. I am disappointed, though, that Mike, you've chosen to spend close to $200 million to distort my record and to be able to rewrite history. You know, I've opposed tax increases, rent increases, I've opposed your MTA increases. But still, as mayor, I believe that I would lead New York City to different areas of affordability, focus on the middle class and working New Yorkers. I think that's important. But the issue in this campaign is, can the richest man in New York City play by his own set of rules while the rest of us play by another set of rules? We voted for term limits overwhelmingly twice. New Yorkers are going to have to make a decision in November. Voters are going to have to decide whether one person and one person alone can undermine term limits for their own self-interest. I want to be a mayor for all New Yorkers.
Thank you, Mr. Thompson. And so I will begin tonight with the first question, and it sort of deals with what you just brought up, Mr. Thompson. Over the last few weeks, and this is for you, Mr. Mayor, it starts with you, but it's for both of you, actually. The tone of this campaign has turned increasingly negative. Mr. Mayor, your campaign mailings and television ads attack your opponent, something that, for the most part, you avoided doing in your re-election campaign 4 years ago. Mr. Thompson, your most recent ads have focused on the mayor, attacking him, and you recently likened Mr. Bloomberg to former President George W. Bush. For you to become mayor, don't voters have to learn to like you and not just dislike the mayor? And for you, Mr. Mayor, starting with you, why are you spending so much money attacking Mr. Thompson?
Well, I'm not attacking Mr. Thompson. I'm trying to set the record straight. I'm trying to tell the people what we've done and to correct the statements of my opponent when he puts out statements that aren't correct. You know, that's what campaigns are all about. Campaigns are about trying to show the difference between the two candidates that the voters are going to have to choose from when they get to the polls. We can look at the records in the past, and we can look at our proposals for the future. When you try to compare the records in the past, you look for things where you've both done similar things, and there's one obvious one. My opponent ran the Department of Education, the old Board of Education, for the 90s, and I arguably have run it since 2002. When he ran the Board of Education, schools were much more violent. Graduation rates were 50% or below. Test scores were much lower than they are today, and in fact, there were groups that always tested poorly and nobody tried to do anything about it. That's his record. And you can compare it to what we've done, where the schools are safer and there's less disruption in the class and test scores are better and we're able to attract lots of good teachers and we've built a lot of classroom spaces and reduced the cost of construction. I think it's fair to say that people understand today the schools are a lot better than they were before. And if you're going to look to the future, comparing what we've both done and the same thing in the past is as good a ways to do it as any. That's what a campaign is about, and that's what advertising is about, and that's what the debate is about.
Thank you, Mr. Bloomberg. Mr. Thompson.
Well, Dominic, I think that I've spent my time campaigning trying to point out the legitimate differences between Mike Bloomberg and myself. That's what I've attempted to do. The mayor has spent an obscene amount of money to distort my record and to try and rewrite history. The truth is, when you start to look at so many instances, the Department of Education, it's ironic that the mayor would talk about the education system in the past, if only because he talked about mayoral control, because he pointed out under the old Board of Education, no one was in charge. The mayor, the board, the chancellor, so many people were in charge. No one was in charge. So it's ironic that he would try and distort facts and information, try and change the past to say that I was the person who was in charge of the Department of Education or the Board of Education. Nothing could be further from the truth, and it is unfortunate that the mayor has attempted to spend this kind of money to distort my record and really to attack my integrity.
Mr. Mayor?
If he believes nobody was in charge, why didn't he try to get control? The bottom line is he did help us get mayoral control, which he was against and then said he was in favor, but it really didn't have any control the way he wanted to do it. But we got mayoral control as much because when he ran it, the schools were terrible. And the public and the legislature said, no mas. We're going to finally fix this system. And that's how mayoral control got enacted. And if he wants to walk away from what he did, the bottom line is the schools were much worse then. It was a failing school system.
Mr. Thompson, I'm going to let you respond. In 1 second, we're going to Brian Lair. But can you say here tonight, and I know that you were not the chancellor, but the bottom line, during your tenure at the Board of Education, can you say that you did a better job of running the school system than Mike Bloomberg?
Again, Dominic, I didn't run the school system. If I was the mayor and had the $20 billion that the mayor has right now to run the school system and had mayoral control, I would do a better job. It is as simple as that. So let's start talking about reality, Dominic. This apples to oranges comparison isn't realistic.
But does your record at the Board of Ed compare to Bloomberg's record
Dominic,
at the Board of
my
Ed?
record at the Board of Education was described by the New York Times as a reformer. I led a reform effort there. I helped to end decentralization, putting someone in charge for the first time in decades. I helped to move math scores up and increase reading scores. Did I do a good job? Is it a record that I am proud of? Yes. At the same point, it is an apples to oranges comparison, and one that the mayor likes to make because it really isn't accurate and isn't true.
You know,
Mr. Mayor?
you don't get a medal for rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic, and that's exactly what he did.
Since we are going to go back and forth, and that's clear, the truth is back then, if it wouldn't have been for the work that I did at the Board of Education, mayoral control probably would not have happened. If I hadn't stood up and got involved when Mike Bloomberg, back when he wasn't involved and paid no attention to education, I chose to get involved. I chose to help bring reform to an institution that had lacked it for decades. So the truth is, if it wasn't for the work that I did, mayoral control wouldn't have happened. When people like Mike Bloomberg sat back and did nothing, when our children were suffering and not learning, I chose to get involved and take on a difficult situation.
Okay, we have to move on now, gentlemen. Let's now go to our panel. And our first question of the night from the panel, it comes from Brian Lair, who has a question for Controller Thompson.
Thank you, Dominic. Good evening, both of you candidates. And Mr. Thompson, you get the first response on a question about term limits. You, I understand, oppose term limits as an idea, and you don't like referenda, which is how term limits were enacted in New York City, and yet you're making this a central issue in your campaign with respect to the term limits extension law that's allowing the mayor to run. How much do you really think that the voters should take the term limits question into account compared to the mayor's record?
Well, first, I think that let's set the stage. For 7 years, Mike Bloomberg promised the voters of New York City that under no circumstance would he try and avoid the public by changing term limits. It's as simple as that. I think his phrase was, it would be disgraceful to go around the people of New York City and to go to the city council and change term limits. And in the end, when self-interest called, he did just that. He went around the people of New York City, he went to the city council and changed term limits. I think the voters of New York are insulted. I think they're upset by the fact that the mayor undermined democracy and went around them. I think they would like to have a vote on the issue of term limits. That's what they said all along. So I just think that right now, as he continues to spend money to try and convince voters and rewrite history that he didn't undermine term limits, he didn't, in fact, betray the trust that he had with the people of New York City, I think it is an issue. And I think it's one that the voters of New York City still aren't happy about.
Mr. Mayor.
We all know that we have a very difficult time here with the recession. A lot of my friends came to me, and people that I didn't even know, and asked me to run again. And I thought, in the end, on November 3rd, we'll have a vote on what really matters, a vote between two candidates. And the public has to decide that day which of the two candidates they want to take this city forward. They have to decide who's got the best record and who has promises for the future that are practical, can be implemented, and that we can afford. They've got to take a look at how we've conducted ourselves in the past and say, okay, I hope that person will do it going forward. And I think in the end, that's the key here. Two candidates, who can lead the city? Who's going to improve education? Who's going to bring down crime? Who's going to be there as a steward through tough financial times? Who's going to improve public health? Who's going to work on the environment and get guns off the streets. That's the issue facing the voters.
So are you saying, Mr. Mr. Bloomberg, are you saying that the promises not to extend term limits that you made that Mr. Thompson referenced, unless you're saying you didn't make those promises, don't matter, and that you're the indispensable man for this city?
No, nobody is indispensable, but the voters have a choice. And if that's their issue on November 3rd, they can express themselves. They have lost absolutely nothing. They've just got more choice this way.
The voters of New York City spoke twice. Overwhelmingly, they said serve 2 terms and then leave. And that was the commitment. That was the bond that we had with the people of New York City when we ran the first time. We promised that we would adhere to the rules. We wouldn't have had the opportunity to run if it wouldn't have been for that. So to turn around then later and say that's not what the people of New York City meant, they said it twice, they said it loudly and resoundingly.
Mr. Thompson, does that trump the record?
It's not a question of trumping the record. We're talking about right and wrong. Should not have been allowed to run a 3rd time. The people of New York had spoken, and to do it so cynically, by waiting until the last minute when the referendum couldn't go on the ballot, really is the height of hypocrisy. It is wrong. Mike Bloomberg lied to the people of New York City.
To follow up very briefly, Mr. Mayor, you know there are many people who think you're doing a very good job in office, but who are very offended by this and think it's a breach of democracy. Are you at all embarrassed by it?
No, I understand their thoughts. I understand their views. But in the end, the choices that face them are vote for my opponent or vote for me. And if they feel that term limits was the most important thing, they can express themselves.
Will you promise tonight not to run for a 4th term?
Yes.
Okay.
Is that a yes?
That is a yes.
Okay, thank you very much, Brian. And now we go to Adam Lisberg. Adam?
Good evening. Mr. Bloomberg, in your time in office, teacher salaries have gone up 43%, total education operating expenditures of the DOE have gone up 55%. Do you really think most parents would agree that the schools are 43% or 55% better?
I don't think that's the measure because there's inflation built in there. There's the competitive factor. We have to pay our teachers what they can make elsewhere. After all, while they're dedicated people and they want to help our children and they don't go into public service to make a lot of money, they still have to pay the rent. They still have to buy food. They still want to go on a vacation. And so paying them is just the beginning. It is giving them the opportunity to really help our kids that attracts them to come here. But they still certainly deserve the getting paid not as much as they'd like, but as much as we can afford, a fair wage. And the ways to set a fair wage is to look what they can make in the surrounding counties. You know, in the end, these teachers have made the difference. Education is one teacher looking one child in the eye, and we want the best teachers we can possibly find. They say in real estate, 3 things matter: location, location, location. In education, it's quality of teacher, quality of teacher, quality of teacher. And when I came into office, I said education was my #1 priority. That's where we're going to put our money, and that's exactly what we have done. And I think the results show. The reason the kids are doing better, as much as anything, is the teachers. It's also the principals. It's also the parent coordinators. It's also the school safety agents. It's also the parents, and it's certainly the kids. But teachers are the key to education. And if you want the best, you got to pay them.
Mr. Thompson, I'm curious your response. And I also want to ask you, you've been very critical of how the mayor has run the schools since it became clear that you'd be running against him. I'm wondering why you weren't more vocal before last year.
I think I have been vocal over the last 7 years. I've pointed out a number of the problems at the Department of Education. I've talked about the failure to involve parents and really include parents in this school system over the last 7 years. They have been shut out. I've talked about the George Bush No Child Left Behind focus on standardized testing that's being employed right now and how that is wrong, and our children are being taught to take tests, but they're not learning critical thinking, comprehension, and the ability to be able to compete on a global economy. I've pointed out the lack of fiscal transparency and waste and the rise of no-bid contracts at the Department of Education over the last 7 years also. So over that period of time, I haven't been silent. I've been a critic. I've been perhaps at times a vocal critic, and I know the Department of Education and the mayor would wish I would go away. But I've stood up and fought for what I believe is right.
Mr. Bloomberg?
You know, we do test our kids. We give them the same tests that were given during the time that my opponent ran the old Board of Education. They are mandated state tests mostly. We give them the same test that a potential employer will give them. And if the test is, can you read? The answer is that we should be giving that test. And the good news is our kids are doing better on that test by that standard all the time. But let me say one thing. If you believe that the school system was better when Bill Thompson ran it, you should vote for him. And if you believe it's better than now, then I'd appreciate your vote. You should vote for me.
Okay, thank you very much, Adam. And now we go to Juan Manuel Benitez.
Gracias, Dominic. Gracias, señor alcalde. Gracias, señor Contralor, por haber aceptado la invitación a debatir aquí en el Museo del Barrio. Now, Mr. Comptroller, I went to the organizational chart of your office, and I'm sorry because the viewers are not going to be able to see it, but they can go online, they can find it. Out of 38 people, just 4 of them are Latinos. Knowing that the city is about like 27% Hispanic, why are Latinos so underrepresented in your office after 8 years?
The truth is, Latinos have been well represented in my office. If you look over the 8 years that I've been there, Latinos have been chief investment officer for our city's pension funds, have been executive deputy controller within my office, deputy controller for deputy controller for legal and settlements, deputy controllers for a number of different things over the period of time. Latinos occupy a number of high positions in my office, have over the almost 8 years that I've been there. I'm very proud of that record.
How about this chart then? Like just 4 out of 38 people, and just 2 with real power.
It is more than 4 out of 38, and I think that everybody knows, everyone from Eddie Castell over the years to Herb Barbeau to Arelis Perez to a number of other people occupy positions of real power in my office. So
would you say that Latinos are represented accurately in your office?
Are highly represented, have been for over an 8-year period of time in my office. It isn't something I take lightly. Diversity is important. I've gone out and assembled the best and brightest and talented, and Latinos have been well represented in my administration.
Thank you, Mr. Comptroller. And Mr. Mayor, I did the same with the key members of the Bloomberg administration. And out of 90 people, just 8 are Latino, about less than 10%.
Más o menos 40% de nuestros directores y 30% de nuestros nombrados son personas de colores. No sé cuándo son latinos u otros grupos, pero te daré los números mañana.
But do you think Latinos are...
But wait a minute, wait. In fairness, Mr.
I said 40%, sorry. 40% of the managers in the city government and 30% of the people that I have named to things are people of color. I don't have the breakdown exactly between Latinos and other groups, but I'll be happy to get that.
So let me ask you this, Mr. Bloomberg, because if you're re-elected, you will have to name a new fire department commissioner. Would you consider hiring a Latino?
I would consider.
Would you name a Latino?
I would consider everybody. I never thought that ethnicity mattered. That would not be one of the things that I would think about. We'll look for the best person the way I've always done. We'll conduct a national search. I trust the same person that's done all my past searches, Nat Leventhal, will do that search, and he will identify a handful of very qualified candidates, and then I'll sit down with my top management and select from that group. But keep in mind, we have always looked for the best, and I've worked very hard to make sure that our administration is open to people regardless of the language they speak, regardless of the religion they practice, regardless of where they come from. It's not just Latinos, it's people from all over the world that I want to make sure that our government is filled with, because they're the ones that bring the new ideas, they're the ones that tell us how things are done elsewhere.
I'm sorry, but we're running out of time, Mr. Mayor. Sorry.
And if we're talking about people of color in my office, probably the number in my office is closer to 60% of people of color in the office who have worked hard, who are, as they pointed out, the best and the brightest, who have served the people of this city well. That's the true story. And as I said, the one thing, I've had Latinos that we come in the highest positions in my office, making the hard decisions, making decisions to lead this city forward. So I'm proud of the record of inclusion in my office, of diversity, and a strong amount of diversity. So we have done the best.
Thank you very much, Mr. Thompson, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Juan. And now we move on to Michael Scotto.
Thank you, Dominic. This question is for Mayor Bloomberg. Your campaign has accused Bill Thompson of pay-to-play politics for accepting contributions from people who do business with the city. But is there such a thing as reverse pay-to-play? And I bring that up because in 2008, your philanthropy gave $235 million to charities, many of them in the city, and that's up nearly 15% from 2007. Is it possible that these contributions help insulate your policies from criticism and buy support from organizations that rely heavily on the funding you provide them?
Be a pretty expensive ways to buy a vote. The bottom line is, pay-to-play is where you get money in return for doing a favor. I'm giving money. I'm proud of the support that I have given each year to a lot of institutions that help this city and work around the world. And if you want to talk about pay-to-play, just read the New York Times or the Daily News. My opponent has taken something like $650,000 from people who either manage money or have found money managers, in return for which this city has gotten worse performance out of the pension system. And that performance, that deficit is going to have to be made up, that shortfall, by the taxpayers, because we have defined benefit plans. This is just not the ways we should be running government. And there's just no question what happened here. He says, oh, it's separate, but nobody thinks it's separate. Come on, nobody believes that. The bottom line is, if you want to do business with city pension funds, you would have had to pay, and that's wrong.
And just to follow up, to get back to the original question, though, the millions of dollars that you give organizations throughout the city, do they not provide any favors for you?
I don't think so. I think most of the people that get the gifts or that are the beneficiaries probably don't even know where the money comes from, for a start. Number two, it goes to the organizations, not to individuals. The organizations distribute the money. I'm not out there buying votes. I'm out there trying to help this city.
So these people support you based on your policies, not on any money that you give them?
I would assume that most of the people that run these organizations that I support want good government, and they want people who are generous. And you can be generous with your time. Go to NYC Service. You don't have to do it with money. But I'm very proud of the amount of monies that I've given away each year. Each year I've tried to increase it and plan to do so going forward.
And Mr. Thompson, I'd like you to respond to that, but then also get to one of the points that Mr. Bloomberg raised over the money that you've accepted from people who do business with the city. The fact that you have to take these contributions, how can you be as independent as Mayor Bloomberg?
First, the mayor has engaged in paid-to-endorse politics. Let's be honest. He's made donations to organizations that individuals have in turn turned around and supported and endorsed him. And I think the greatest example of that was during the term limit hearing, where people came to City Hall who were receiving funds either from the mayor or from the city of New York, who worked for organizations and have been brought down to stand up and say they supported a change in term limits. Everyone was aware of that. Everyone saw that happen. And then when they were asked why they were there, they said, geez, I was asked to come down by my boss or by the organization that received money from either the city or from the mayor. I'm glad to have an opportunity to set the record straight about a few things when it comes to the pension funds. The mayor acts as if he has no responsibility at all. So that everyone knows, there are 5 pension funds in the city of New York, each having their own board and their own board of directors or their board of trustees. I'm a trustee on 4 of those boards. I'm the advisor to the pension funds. But the mayor of the city of New York chairs each or 4 of the 5 boards. The mayor has more votes on each one of those boards than I do. And the mayor of the city of New York has voted on every investment decision that has come to him, each and every one. So to make believe he's not part of the system is absolutely untrue. It is false. It continues to show how he spends dollar after dollar, this $200 million that he's spending to distort my record.
Okay.
And Dominic, this is something I take seriously, and I would like to continue just a little bit longer. I think as we look, my reputation, my integrity, and I've spent years in government No one has ever questioned my integrity. Mike Bloomberg has done that in trying to distort my record. Mike, you know better than that. You should be ashamed. You should stop it now.
Okay.
You know, we do have 4 votes, but if you look at the city charter, he has the fiduciary responsibility to manage the pension funds. And yes, our 4 appointees did approve these things, but they didn't know that he was getting paid monies to his campaign in return for giving out the business. And if they'd known that, they certainly would have stopped it right away.
So then they voted on investments that were sound, that weren't sound. They voted for bad investments. Which way is it?
No,
did they
that's-
vote for bad investments, Mike, or did they vote, for good investments? What did they vote for? And last but not least, no one has ever received a favor from my office for a nickel of contribution. So let's just end that right now.
They voted on individual investments. They didn't know that the money managers recommending those investments were not picked for their abilities, but were in fact picked because they supported his political aspirations. There's no question about this. Read the Times, read the Daily News. This is exactly what happened. And Bill, if you should just admit what really did happen here.
What really happened is the city's pension funds have done well. We've outperformed the other large public pension funds in this country, and your people have voted for each and every investment. Why? Because they were good investments. And again, no one has received a favor from my office for a campaign contribution ever, and they never will.
Okay, thank you very much, gentlemen. I just, before we go to the lightning round, I just would like to remind the audience, please, that we must be respectful of each of these candidates that is appearing here tonight. If we cannot be respectful, then we're going to ask the NYPD to remove you, because we cannot have the heckling and so on. We're trying to move on with this debate. And so now it is time to move to the lightning round, where I will ask questions that can only be answered with the words yes or no by the candidates. Now, I want to be clear, candidates.
I hate this.
I want to be very clear.
I hate this.
No explanations. Yes or no. And you are required to answer the question. So I guess we'll start with you, Mr. Mayor. Do you exercise daily?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
No.
Mr. Controller, would Rudy Giuliani be a good governor?
No.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
Mr. Mayor, have you ever cheated in golf?
Never.
Mr. Controller?
No.
Mr. Controller, should there be a public option in any national health insurance plan?
Absolutely.
Is that a yes?
Yes.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
Mr. Mayor, should more troops be sent to Afghanistan?
Yes, but that's not a topic for a one-word answer. There's lives on the line here. This is not cute.
Okay. Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson, is Pedro Espada a better majority leader of the state Senate than Joe Bruno?
Yes.
Mr. Bloomberg?
No.
Mr. Bloomberg, should film director Roman Polanski be in prison?
Yes.
Was that?
Yes.
Yes. Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson, does a Big Mac have more than 600 calories?
No.
Mr. Mayor?
I'll go along with Bill. No.
Mr. Bloomberg, do you consider a family that is worth more than $1 million to be rich?
Yes.
Mr. Controller?
Yes.
Mr. Controller, have you ever had a manicure or pedicure?
Not recently, but yes.
Mr. Mayor?
No.
Never?
Don't think so.
Okay.
Do it myself.
Final lightning round question of the night goes to you, Mr. Mayor. We start with you. Has President Obama done enough for gay rights?
No.
Mr. Controller.
He's been there 9 months. Yes.
So the answer is?
Yes.
Okay. Well, that concludes our lightning round. And now it is time for what we call the cross-examination. And we're going to try and handle this here. That's when each candidate gets the opportunity to ask a question of his opponent. Mayor Bloomberg, we start with your question.
We have brought crime down to record lows. We've built an organization that I think is protecting us from terrorism. Bill, I don't understand why you said the first thing you'd do if you got elected is fire Ray Kelly. Just doesn't make any sense to me.
I had said that what I would do, I believe in bringing your own team to the table. So I said that I would replace all commissioners. All commissioners would be replaced under Thompson administration. I'd bring my own team to the table. I've seen in the past where others have brought somebody else's team to the table. It doesn't work as well. So I believe in bringing my own team to the table.
Somehow or other, I just think crime in the streets and terrorism are too important to look for supporters. You've got to look for the best, and we have the best.
And thank you very much, Mayor Bloomberg. We now turn, so you're pleased with his response? Okay. We now turn to Mr. Thompson for his question.
Mike, you were a Democrat who became a Republican to run for mayor. You again switched parties to run for president. When that didn't work, you attempted to become the vice presidential candidate on John McCain's slate, running against Barack Obama. When that didn't work, you came back and changed term limits, even though you had promised not to. And now you've given the Independence Party and Republican parties $500,000 to buy their lines. You talk about progress, not politics. How do you explain that to New York, the people of New York City? Doesn't that look like politics, and politics at its worst?
Well, Bill, I can follow the chronology. I grew up and was a registered Democrat in Boston and then in New York. I did not have the opportunity to run in the Democratic primaries, so I became a Republican. They were nice enough to offer me the opportunity to present myself to the public in the general election. They were helpful, and they gave me an opportunity to become mayor and try to change the city for the better. I became an independent when I was in the situation, had nothing to do with running for president, and I don't think I was ever seriously considered as a vice presidential candidate, no matter what the papers say. But I became an independent when it became obvious to me that if I'm going to work with both sides of the aisle, in Washington and in Albany and New York, being an independent better reflected my nonpartisan views and gave me an opportunity to do what you have to do if you're going to make progress. We've got to get votes in Washington and Albany and in the City Council from both sides of the aisles. And what matters to me is those votes that will do what's right for this city. That's my job. I don't have the option of doing anything else. I can't be partisan. I don't think the mayor should ever be partisan. As LaGuardia said, there's no Republican or Democratic way to pick up the garbage. And I can tell you, you're not going to get legislation through either Washington or Albany or the City Council that's controversial and that really we need desperately unless you can rally people from both sides of the aisle. So being an independent really gets that opportunity for me, and it fits my lack of partisan interest.
It just isn't the party. It's the expenditure of dollars to help to buy lines, to buy the Republican line, to buy the Independence Party line. At each and every level, it hasn't been about the people of New York City, it's been about you. Don't you consider the purchasing of those lines politics at its worst?
I didn't buy anybody. I will support people on both sides of the aisle if they will vote for the things that are good for New York City, whether that's mayoral control of the schools or a tax package or a budget in Albany that helps us, whether that's working on public health issues or immigration that I feel so strongly about. in Washington. I will support those people who do what's right for New York City, and I'm not ashamed to do so. That's exactly what I should be doing.
Okay. Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Thompson. It is now time for a second round of questions from our panel, and we begin again with Brian Lair, who has a question for Mayor Bloomberg. Brian?
And thank you again, Dominic. Mr. Bloomberg, you've said that the rezoning of New York City is one of your proudest accomplishments,
Yes.
right alongside education. And yet many New Yorkers also feel that the city is uglier as a result of all the high-rise condos going up, and many feel that they've been displaced from their homes by gentrification. On balance, can you argue that the rezoning of the city has been a good thing for the people?
Well, I think you're absolutely right. There are certainly people that don't like the big buildings and people that do feel they're being pushed out, but in almost all those cases, that was from previous zonings. Those that have been done in the last 8 years have been done, and the effect of them after they've gone through all of the approval processes and in the end done by the City Council at our request and at the request of Amanda Burden and the City Planning Commission, those rezonings give us a future. And what we've tried to do is in neighborhoods like parts of Queens and parts of Staten Island that are residential, preserve the character of the neighborhood and prevent the big buildings from going up. On the other hand, in places like Greenpoint, Williamsburg, where we do have the space for big new developments, Hunts Point South, places like that where you can accommodate the people who want to come to the city and find housing, where people who want to build big stores and build factories so they can manufacture. We have to have a balance. And it's that balance of letting neighborhoods evolve slowly rather than revolutionary, in a revolutionary sense, that is really, I think, one of the great accomplishments. Just take a look at Willets Point, a place where there really wasn't much economic activity going. Today, all of the police pieces are in place so that when the economy gets better and when banks start to lend, people will be able to build there, create hotels and jobs and factories. And the same thing is true in other neighborhoods.
Mr. Thompson, how supportive, how critical?
Well, I think that if you look around the city of New York right now, the story of New York from neighborhood to neighborhood to neighborhood, luxury buildings that are sitting there vacant, that had been rezoned for in a number of different ways, and now we're seeing, this excess luxury housing that's sitting there vacant. The story of the city of New York these days are middle class and working New Yorkers who are being squeezed and pushed out of their neighborhoods through zoning and through the increase of property taxes, increase of rents, increase of water rates, you name it. That's what has helped to push people out of the city of New York.
If elected, would you undo any of the zoning that Mr. Bloomberg has done?
Well, I think it's important that we go back and take a look from neighborhood to neighborhood. You don't want to go back 20 years, but you would like to look at neighborhoods across the city of New York working in what I call smart growth and fair growth, along with communities.
Can you name one that you would roll back?
I know that I would definitely take a second look at the west side of Manhattan and Hudson Yards. I think it's in looking at what needs to go there. We need to look at the priorities for the city of New York. We need middle and moderate income housing. That's what we should start to look at there, not the huge mix that's being looked at, housing. That's the most desperate need, or one of the most desperate needs that we have in the city of New York these days.
Well, Bill's right that we need housing. You have to have developers willing to put money in. They have to have space to do it. And the West Side plans do include an awful lot of housing. But there's housing throughout the city and different kinds of housing. For example, in the Homeport on Staten Island, rental housing. Staten Island does not have any rental housing. You go to other neighborhoods, we're building high-rises, and the other neighborhoods, we're building separate, low-rise, two-story houses. Yes, it's true that there are about 3,000 apartments that have come on the market that are unsaleable at the moment. That's 3,000 out of 3 million, just to put it in context, going through the worst recession we've had in many decades. So I think the future for the city for real estate is still quite strong. People are moving here. This argument that people are moving out isn't true. Our population continues to go up, and all the demographers say there's no increase in the number of people moving out. There are just other people moving in.
If we look, 2006, over 150,000 middle-class families moved out. People come up to us and speak to you all the time about the fact they can no longer afford to live in the city of New York. I met a woman a couple of weeks ago who said, geez, I'd love to be able to vote for you. I work in downtown Brooklyn, but I've had to move to the Poconos because my rent has been moved up to $2,000 and I can no longer afford to live in the city of New York. That's the story of New York City these days, of working and middle-class people who can no longer afford to live in the city that they've helped to make great. And this city administration, this Bloomberg administration, has not focused on them. If anything, they've continued to increase water rates, taxes, and other things on their back to help squeeze them out of the city.
Okay.
Let me just point out with water rates, it's easy to yell about water rates, but 85% of all the water rates go to pay for mandated programs which the state, the federal government, or the courts have forced on this city. So if you don't like the water rates, and I don't like them any more than anybody else, the attention should be directed at Albany and at Washington, because that's where the money has to go.
The truth of water rates, and I've spoken out and testified repeatedly over the last few years and shown that the people of the city of New York, when it comes to water rates, are being overcharged. They're being gouged. The city is charging them an excess amount. And when I went to the water board 2 years ago, I was promised by the chair of the water board, as well as two of the other members who sided with me, that in fact they would work to bring rates down. A new study was supposed to have been done by the DEP commissioner, because they realized that people were being charged in excess amounts, called excess rent, and it goes into the general fund of the city of New York. When I came back this year, members of the water board had changed. The chair had been removed because he had agreed with me. Two of the other members who believed that water rates were too high had been removed and were no longer on the board, and the DEP commissioner was a different one. Water rates are too high. They're backdoor property taxes right now, and it needs to end.
Thank you very much, Mr. Thompson and Mr. Bloomberg. And thank you for the question, Brian. We now turn to the next question from Adam Lisberg.
Mr. Thompson, last year in New York, 543,000 people were stopped and frisked by police, overwhelmingly black and Hispanic. The number keeps rising. You surprised some people in one of the primary debates when you said you supported stop and frisks as a useful police tool. But when just 6% of those stopped end up getting arrested, how useful is it?
What I said was I support stop and frisk as a valuable policing tool, but right now, I think we all know it's being overused. They're on pace this year to stop and frisk over 600,000 men and women across the city of New York. And I think that the problem, communities feel that they are being singled out and targeted. And when people feel that way and the numbers support it, then you need to make change.
How would you strike that balance?
How? Using stop and frisk for what it was supposed to be used. If you want to take guns off the streets, you have suspicions about an individual, then you stop them. What stop and frisk is being used now, or being misused for right now, is to stop almost everybody. And as we see, almost 90% of those who are stopped and frisked have done nothing wrong. And almost 90% of those people are African American and Latino.
Mr. Mayor, you've been in charge of the police department during this, and if the number keeps rising, at what point do you say the raw number is just too high?
You know, when I got elected, I set two goals for myself. One was to continue to bring crime down, something that nobody thought we would do. And certainly in this day and age, with the economy down, conventional wisdom is crime always goes up. Nobody thought we could continue to do, but the fact of the matter is we're going to set another record this year for low crime. But at the same time, my other goal was to improve community police relations. And I think one of the things I'm most proud of is that we have accomplished both at exactly the same time. You know, every child's life is precious. Everyone means something to me. And when I read about a child getting shot in the streets, I think to myself, could I have done more to get guns off the street? Could I have done more fighting the NRA? But if you take a look, we have focused on making sure that our police department reflects the community. A majority of our police department now are minorities. We have focused on training. We even have community activists come and sit with each new class and try to harangue them and stir them up and explain to them what's going to happen and taunt them so that they get used to the real world out there and they understand they have a responsibility to protect as well as to prevent, as well as to go and look for people where there's a reasonable suspicion that they might have done something. I am very concerned that they do this in a responsible way. I think it is an effective tool to keep bringing crime down, and I've looked very carefully at it. And while I think we have to continue to look at it, so far I think the police department has struck the right balance. And the fact that I have been endorsed by so many people from so many different communities says to me that we probably have gotten it right. Not perfect, something down the middle, and that's what we have to do in the real world.
I believe I don't think anybody would be tougher on crime than I would be as mayor. At the same point, when communities feel that they're singled out, when the numbers reflect that something is being done to an excess, that it's being overused, then the mayor needs to step in, pay attention, and ask that that be changed and that a fairer policy be put in place. Right now, as we look at stop and frisk about to go over 600,000 this year, I don't think anybody would say that it hasn't been overused. If you talk to police officers privately, they will tell you that they're being forced to stop and make many stop and frisk, and they think it's being overused.
Okay, thank you very much. And so now we turn from Adam to Juan Manuel Benitez for the next question.
Thank you, Dominic. Mr. Mayor, you have banned smoking in public places, and you're talking about maybe extending that measure to parks. You've banned trans fats and imposed calorie count menus. Is it a role of government to regulate behavior? And if you're reelected, what's coming?
Well, it's the role of government to try to improve the length and the quality of people's lives, or at least give them the information that they need to make intelligent decisions. We have had the City Council pass a law, had to fight it through the courts, but won, so that chain restaurants have to put up calorie counts. Nobody makes you not buy the Big Mac, which I hope Bill and I are both right, of less than 600 calories, but at least people have that information. We're trying to teach kids in school about good nutrition. The fact of the matter is, a third of our children are bordering on obesity, and if they are obese, they are very likely to be obese as an adult, and it shortens your lives. Smoking has cut 10,000 deaths a year out of the city's death rate. The bottom line is, today in New York City, our life expectancy is greater than in the country as a whole for the first time since World War II. And in the last 8 years, life expectancy has increased by 15 months, 50% more than virtually any other big city in this country. It is the job of government, if something is detrimental to your health, to A, warn you, and B, if it's serious, try to prevent it. If there was asbestos in your school, we'd pull the kids out. If there was something in the workplace that made it unsafe, we'd right away stop your factory until we fixed it.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Comptroller, any of those measures that you wouldn't have done, and do you think it's a role of government to regulate behavior?
Well, what I'd like to see when we talk about health, and I don't think anybody is going to say that they wouldn't do this, have done the smoking ban. I think that when you look at health issues in New York City, one of the things that I've tried to focus on, one of the things that I think is important, health disparities among communities. The community that we're in right now, tonight, has a higher level of asthma and a number of other diseases, higher levels of cancer, higher level of diabetes. I think it's important that New York, and I've advocated starting this in our schools, having our children looked at, not just for hearing and vision, but for other health issues to make sure that they can be healthier, to make sure that we start to focus on those issues early, and that across the city of New York, we create greater access to preventative care for so many so they can live longer, and we can also make sure that each...
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. One thing.
Yes.
Congestion pricing was designed as much as anything to clean the air, because Bill's right. Kids have, in many neighborhoods in the city, an asthma rate 4 times higher than the average. We've worked very hard to try to get bodegas to carry fresh foods and 2% milk and diet drinks. In fact, we got a great gift from Lori Tisch to have carts on the streets to try to make sure that at least the good stuff is available. So education, making it available, and in some cases, yes, it is the job of government to prevent.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, we are down to 30 seconds before we go to the closing statements. So I don't think we can can you abbreviate your question quickly?
I'll make it really quick. This is on the mayor's homeless policies. He had promised in 2004 to reduce by 2/3. The number is higher than ever, more than 10,000 families But what would you, Mr. Thompson, do specifically? What would you do differently than the mayor, and how can you do that given the state of the economy?
Well, the mayor had promised to bring homelessness down by 2/3 in his tenure. And in fact, what we saw today was a record number of homeless families and individuals in the city of New York. You need to focus on preventing homelessness. We need to reopen some Section 8 vouchers to create priorities for those to be able to go into the housing authority. We need to be able to build more affordable housing so homeless families don't wind up, so homeless families have a place to go. There's so many things that we need to do in that area.
The fact of the matter is the federal government's cut back the number of Section 8 vouchers. We created our own called Work Advantage. The Work Advantage vouchers, where you have to work in order to get them, has been the most successful thing we've done. We've placed 175,000 people in permanent housing. Bill's right. You have to prevent, but remember that what happened when you fell through the safety net, and particularly when the economy is down where a lot of people are coming in. Today, nobody sleeps on benches. Today, we don't bus kids around in the middle of the night. Today, we don't have those disgraceful things where people had to come in and be treated like cattle. We've made the system better, we've worked on prevention, and we've moved record numbers of people out into permanent housing. There's not a lot we can do short-term about the recession, but we can make sure if they have a family, for example, someplace where the families, we can reunite the families and the families can take care of them, that we help them do that.
And we have a record number of homeless individuals, and the city's policies have helped to create more homeless individuals each and every day.
Okay. Well, gentlemen, it has certainly been a lively hour. Before we go to the closing statements, I just want to know one thing. Is it possible, is there something that each of you could say nice about the other?
Sure.
Go ahead, Mr. Mayor.
He's a great golfer, and we've done a lot of things together, and we've had some good times together. I just think that he's not the right person to lead this city for the next 4 years, and that I am, plain and simple.
I think the mayor is well-dressed, and his golf game has shown great improvement. At the same point, after 8 years, 8 is enough, and it's time for him to go.
No, wait. Eight isn't enough for better schools. 8 isn't enough for lower crime. 8 isn't enough for good government in this city. Quite the contrary. 8 is not enough for every one of the good things that's happened, and I think that's what the public is going to decide on November 3rd.
And 8 is enough. 8 is enough when you violate the will of the people and overturn term limits.
Okay. All right. Enough, gentlemen. It is now time that we move on to the closing remarks by the candidates. You each have 60 seconds, and we begin with Mayor Bloomberg.
We came back, as I said before, from 9/11. We'll come back from this recession. What we've done in the last 8 years is a stepping stone. We shouldn't look at it and pat ourselves on the back and say that's the end game. Quite the contrary. We should be proud of what we've done. We should be proud of what we as citizens have done, what we, the 300,000 municipal workers, have done. We should be proud of what our legislature has done, the city council. They've really made some big changes here, much better. They've done a lot of reforms that Albany hasn't done and Washington hasn't done. But what we've done is we've put in place a building block, and we can take this city to a new level. We will recover from this recession stronger than any other city. We'll recover faster because what's unique about New York is its diversity and the way we live together as a mixture, not as a mosaic. That's the great strength of this city. People come here because they want to practice their religion and they want to say what they want to say without worrying about being thrown in jail. They want to be here to be in control of their own destiny. They provide the vitality that we need in this city. And the best days for New York City are yet to come.
Thank you very much, Mayor Bloomberg. And now the closing comment from City Controller Bill Thompson.
Well, again, let me thank all of you for the opportunity to have the debate tonight. And let me again thank my opponent for being here. I know, over the last 8 years, middle class and working New Yorkers have been squeezed and pushed out of the city of New York. They've watched water rates go up, sales tax go up, property rates go up, and assessments. They've watched their MTA fares go up and parking tickets skyrocket. Think that right now, Mayor Bloomberg is spending almost $200 million to try and rewrite history and get the people of New York City to forget that he violated their trust when it came to term limits. We can't stand for that. The people of New York City aren't for sale. And on November 3rd, I suggest that we come out and send a message to Mike Bloomberg that that's our own version of term limits, that November 3rd be our referendum on term limits, and that we say that we are not for sale. So, again, it's been a pleasure to be here. For everyone in the audience, I look forward to being a mayor for all New Yorkers. Thank you, Dominic.
Thank you very much. And so, we thank you very much, Mr. Mayor, for being here tonight. We also thank you, Mr. Controller Bill Thompson, for being here tonight. That concludes our debate. I would also like to thank our panelists and, again, the candidates for making this a very lively and interesting evening. And, of course, we'd all like to thank El Museo del Barrio for allowing us the use of their beautiful theater here. Again, thank you and good night.